Okay everyone, so in this next lesson, let's talk about PHP functions. And this is going to be something that we will definitely be using when we are already building some projects with the PHP language. Okay everyone, just before we go and proceed with the PHP function, I just wanted to show you that I got some photos from Unsplash from Joanna Kosinka so that we can try to at least have some sort of styling in our site here. And I just want to show you what I did here. I removed from the index.php just to show you what I did. You would see here I just took the examples from our header. As you can see here, I took this from the header, I placed it inside of the main tag, so at least you'll have an idea and you can try to follow along. And I also took out, I just commented out our require ones, and I took out the body HTML tags and the last part and placed it inside of our footer.php. And then the header, I think that's I just added some nav brand here, and I added the lesson functions link, and I created this link to, but I just commented it out first. We will be creating a very simple calculator application later on and some more examples. And in here I just use the same thing in our functions.php. You would see I have used the head.php. I added the link styles sheet. I have the include header.php. These are the things that we used in the previous lessons. I used include here to add a header. I added the div element so that I can target it with the use of CSS styling. And we have the built-in functions and custom functions, which are going to be the two things that you will try to identify, especially if you're watching tutorials. Usually what you would want to look for would be to check on whether that is a built-in function or a custom function that we as the programmer created. Usually that's what I usually look for when I'm watching other tutorials. And of course the footer.php here. And for the stylings, these are the styles that I created. I created a universal reset. We have the body tag with the text alignment center. I set up the main tag with the text align left and padding left 20%. Of course, you can try to go and implement your own stylings here. I just wanted to at least have something to see while we're working with our exercises. So we do have our function. I remove the list style type, set it to none, text align left, and then we have the header, and we just set the height, viewport height, and background image URL. I set the background size to cover, position relative, and I was working on the Z index, but I think that's not going to be needed anymore. We have the list style type none for the UL, and the header position absolute so that I can center the text for the header H1. And I used some techniques here for centering it, top 50%, left 50%, transform, translate, and then the border radius 50%. And I also set up the footer for the 20 viewport height. These are the things that we did with the footer section in a previous lesson. And I added some media queries, max width of 600 pixels, and for the font size to them, padding 15%, top 55%. We have our main element in text align center, padding left, and I think that should be 0%. And we have our 0 UL list style type to none. So at least you can follow along whatever I did in for the stylings. So moving forward with our main topic for this lesson, and that will be functions. We do have two types of functions that we will encounter if we try to build projects, and that will be one will be built-in functions, which are built-in functions that has been already programmed for us in the language that we can try to just call directly from within a script, or for it to be able to perform a specific task. We did use one of that in some of our lessons in the past, and that will be the count function. So I just paused the video here and I placed here the different categories of PHP functions, and that count function is actually found inside of the array category. And these are some of the other categories of built-in functions, just so at least you will be aware that these are some things that you might be able to run through as you go deeper into the PHP language. So depending on the projects that you'll be building, you might be able to encounter using some of these built-in functions. We won't be able to cover everything, but we'll try to look into some of those built-in functions as we go along with our exploration of functions inside of the PHP language. Now, when you say custom functions or user-defined functions, these are functions that we create as a programmer. So a function syntax will be, let me just go here, and let's have here a PHP tag. So things to take note of: a function is a block of statements, and we can use this repeatedly as we work with our program in a program. And it can also be, it will not be executed automatically when a page loads, and will be executed by a call to the function. So we'll see that in action later on. So it's a block of statements, can be repeatedly used in our programs, will not be executed automatically when a page loads, and will be executed by a call to the function. So if we want to create a user-defined function, we will be using the function keyword. So we'll be doing a function declaration with the function keyword, followed by the name of the function. Let's say, for example, I call this anything that you, my personal message. And as I mentioned, this is why I am calling the open and close parenthesis as function invocation operator. And as we've said, we have the code block operator, the curly brackets, and in here we can say echo, and let's say hello world. Let's end that statement. So you'll see if I go back to the browser, it's not yet being seen on the browser because we have to call the function by means of invoking it, or calling the function by writing the name that we've created, this customized name, and then invoke it with the use of the function invocation operators. And this can contain multiple statements depending on the logic of the application that you're building. Now we do see that it is displaying the hello world text, and I think we can just adjust this a little bit. Let's try to see if we put it in here, just so that we do see that hello world text appearing on our browser. So this is what we call a function declaration, and we do have the function keyword that's built in the PHP language. This one is going to be a custom name or identifier that we can use to call on the function. And we have the function invocation operator. We have the code block operators that contains in between the code block operators, the curly brackets. We can have statements inside of those curly brackets that will be running each line once we try to invoke that function. So on this line 33, you would see I'm using the function identifier, and that will be the name. So function name or identifier that we're invoking or calling through the use of the function invocation operator. And that's the way we can call this statement to be displayed on the browser. That's what's currently happening here. PHP functions can also have arguments. So let's have here, so this is what we call calling the function or invoking it. We also have function arguments, from where arguments, let's say for example, we have a function declaration for our family name, and we can pass in an argument, let's say for example, first name. So it's like a variable inside of the function invocation operator, so that in this case, if we try to go and echo, let's say I want to go and echo this first name, and I'll be using this one. When we try to invoke the function now, family name, let's say we can pass in inside of it, let's say rod. You would see we can now have dash, and we're calling the family name, we're invoking the function, then we're passing in some values, string literal data type values, inside of the function invocation operator while we're calling it. What is going to be displayed on the browser? If we try to look into it, we can see that those are, let's just add a line break here and refresh. We now have the following, and let me just go and have a line break also here. So we just add a line break here so that we can, okay, so we can see that we're able to display the values that we place inside of the function invocation operator when we called it, or when we called the function family name, and we are able to display whatever string literal we have placed inside of our echo statement inside of the code block. So now we can see that we have the different names that ends with the family name Lopez. Another thing that we can do with passing in an argument is that we can have multiple arguments inside of a function. So that means, let's say for example, we have our first name here and we have here a year. So these are like variables that we can store the values that we are passing in inside of the function invocation operator once we call the function. So in here, let's say I would want to have some year, 1970. And in here, I'm going to pass in 1920 or 1980. And in here, let's say this is going to be 1979. What now will be displayed? What are we going to be expecting? And let's just have, of course, let's born in, let's add some text here. And we want to also get that argument that we passed in for the year of the date or the year that our family members were born. So if we try to go and refresh, we can see we are able to invoke the function with 2 arguments and display that on the browser. So let's have one more example here and just add a line break here. Let's say I want to have a function that will be adding numbers. We can pass in 2 parameters, number 1, number 2. And inside of this, we want to store the sum of number 1 and number 2. We want to use the add arithmetic operator, and we will be using, so in these 2 parameters, we want to calculate adding the sum of 2 numbers and store it in the sum variable. Then the return statement will be used to send back the result back to the calling code. So in here, let's say I want to go and store the result of the values that we will be passing in. Let's say I would want to have 15 and I want to add that to 5. So number 1 is the first argument, number 2, the second argument is number 5. So 15 plus 5, we should be getting 20 on the browser. So we want to echo this and we want to have sum and concatenate the value of the result variable that contains the current value of the added numbers. So we are expecting that we should be able to display 20 on the browser. So if I go back to the browser, let's try to refresh. Function add number, let's see, add numbers. So you have to make sure that you are correctly identifying the numbers, or the call, the identifier should be correct. So we do get that value of sum 20 displayed on the browser. Just be careful, of course, the name of the variable, the name of the function should be correct. And I just missed the letter S there, that's why we encountered that error. One other thing that I just want to discuss with the PHP arguments inside of PHP that we're talking about here for function arguments is that we can also pass in PHP a PHP default argument value. So let's say I would want to have a function that sets the height. So let's say I want to have a function declaration for setting a height, and inside of the function invocation operator we will have a minimum height, and we're going to assign it the value of 50. And inside of the code block we can echo the height is $sign minimum height, and we will be having a line break here. And now when we try to invoke the function, if we set the height, for example, to 350, we set the height, or we call on the function and pass in a value of 135. And in here we set the height with a value of 80. And in here we will not be giving it, or we will not be passing it any value. So this 50 is the value of the default value of we are expecting here the default value of 50. So if we did not pass in any arguments inside of the function call, we are expecting that this default value that we have assigned to the minimum height variable is the one that's going to be displayed. So if I go back here now, and you would see we do get that value. Let me just add a line break here so that, let's go back here and see. So we have the height is 350, 135, the height is 80, and the height is 50, which is the default value that we have passed in inside of the argument variable minimum height in our function declaration here. So I hope you're getting the idea of user-defined functions. So what we covered here will be how we can set up a default value to our arguments that will serve as a placeholder for the values that we will be placing inside of our function call. And we can also have a default value assigned to that value argument or the parameter that we have passed in here, so that in case that we don't pass in any values, it will be returning the default value. We also learned about the function declaration names or identifiers, and we can pass in multiple arguments. Just take note of the order from where you have made your multiple arguments. We can see here we have the number 1, which will be representing the first value that we passed in inside of the function call, and number 2, which will be representing the placeholder for the value of the second number that we passed in inside of the function call. And we are using the return statement so that we will be able to return the data that contains the value of the sum, and we are able to echo it out through assigning the function call inside of the result variables that we have here. So that's it for this lesson. I hope you got the idea on how to utilize function, some of the basics, and thank you, and see you on our next lessons.